Hello and welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a chance to take a breather, look into the distance a bit so your eyes can give them a rest. Maybe wipe your eyeglasses because that's what I have to do like 5 times a day. Get hydrated and maybe feed the cat so it doesn't make a surprise appearance. Hopefully, keeping my fingers crossed. So before we kick off the rest of the day at DefCamp 2021 Day 1, I would like to remind you that the Hacking Village is on and it's packed with a lot of action. So you can play for fun, you can play to learn, but you can also play to win, especially because the competitions are live until this Sunday. So there's plenty of time to get involved. And plus, the winners will walk away with vouchers for international certifications and licenses for professional cybersecurity tools. So you will not be sorry. You will definitely walk away with something, either experience, fun, new friends, or prizes. So check that out. So now we have an exciting presentation with 2 co-presenters. So we have Marek Smyslovsky, which I did not pronounce correctly, but I promise I did my best, Marek, and Piotr Bazydlo, who are going to walk us through their super vast experience and talk about penetration testing management and the problems that large corporations face in their processes, in their workflows and so on. I bet that there's a ton to learn from both of them. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm excited to dig into the details.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, my name is Marek Smyslovsky, and I have a pleasure to give you this presentation today with my colleague and co-worker, Piotr Bazydlo. So I will be presenting the first part of this presentation. He will be presenting the second part. This presentation was created also with our third colleague, Marcin Grzesiak. Unfortunately, he couldn't join today. At the beginning, a few words who we are. So currently, all 3 of us working for Standard Chartered Bank in a penetration testing team. So I'm the team, and Marcin and Piotr are pen testers that doing quite good stuff in our bank. At the beginning, I would like to tell you how this presentation was created. What was the reason of creating this presentation? So in 2019, Standard Chartered started building an international penetration testing team. Chartered was hired to create a big, robust, and very good penetration testing team that can handle everything that needs to be handled in the worldwide corporation, right? So now in the middle, of course, we are not in the middle, but at the end of 2021, we have over 30 people working in our team, coming from different environments, different companies, different sectors. We have people from finance. We have people that were working for consulting. We have people that were doing security in some kind of critical infrastructure. We have people in Poland. So half of the team is in Poland, half of the team is in India. So a wide range of different experience, right? And when we were working together, we discussed what can be done, how we can improve some processes, how it was done in different companies. So together we summarized those different points of views, issues that we encountered, and create this presentation that we would like to share with you. Of course, those opinion or everything that is expressed in this presentation are our own opinions and do not express the view of our employee of the bank. And of course, the things we are sharing, it's not that related to our bank. It's just taken from many years of our work. I would like to start with the definition, what the penetration testing is. Maybe not what it is, but how we define in this presentation the penetration testing, where it's kind of authorized, systematic, and in-depth evaluation process of testing computer systems, right? Networks, web applications, whatever you need, any part of your infrastructure to find security vulnerabilities, right? That external attacker or internal attacker can exploit. And of course, this process involves gathering information, identify possible entries, trying to break, and important part of it is also reporting, right? Part of penetration testing is create appropriate report that is distributed to different team, and it will be also information about it during our presentation. Okay, 3 important definitions that I would like to share because there are some misunderstanding, and I met many times that for people that are maybe not much technical or not much in the security environment, some of them, they think they are the same, but they are not. So first definition is a bug, right? Bug, it's an error, flaw or fault in a computer program system that caused some kind of unexpected behavior, right? Unexpected, unintended way, right? The issue normally is located, the bug is located either in source code or in some kind of configuration, service configuration, infrastructure configuration, and the components configuration. The vulnerability, however, is a weakness that can be exploited by an attacker, right? To get some privileges in the computer system, right? So if the attacker wants to exploit this vulnerability, there must be a tool or technique that allow him to connect to the weak system. The third definition I would like to present is the finding. We define a finding as a description of vulnerability in the report, right? Difference between bug and vulnerability. This is the situation when there is the most differences with the understanding, right? So at this, on this picture we have an attacker, right? And as you can see, attacker is on his laptop, on his system, sees an application and finding a vulnerability, right? This vulnerability is located somehow in the code, in the system, whatever, right? But what is important, the attacker, the pen tester, doesn't find a bug. He finds vulnerability. Vulnerability is caused by the bug. Sometimes vulnerability goes straightforward to a bug, but it is not always this simple, right? We will see why this definition is important for us a little later. Okay, what is the goal of this presentation? Well, we would like to tell you about everything that is around the penetration testing in large corporation. We will not talking about the technical details of penetration itself. There's like hundreds of presentations, different methodologies and everything. We would like to show you how it looks like when you do not perform one pen test, but when you perform 30 pen tests per month, 40 pen tests per month for one organization, right? It's completely different when you have a consulting company that you are performing. Of course, you can still perform 20, 30, 40 penetration testing per month, but they are like spread to different customers. They are handling. Here, we have one company, and we need to handle everything that is around this penetration testing. That's bring us a lot of issues, problems that we would like to share, and so you can see maybe clearly or identify in your company. Okay, for this presentation, I would like to also give these 2 definitions: application and scope. As an application, I understand in this presentation is understood as a smallest undivided part, a module, component. We call it an application, right? A single URL doesn't mean that it's a single application, right? Which is happens very often. And the scope is definition what will be tested, right? Sometimes the scope contains a few applications, and sometimes the scope may contain only part of the application. This is also important to understand what we are testing. Let's have an example. We have an example domain called www.domain.com, right? It often happens, even I have this in my private bank, right? We're going to the main web page on your bank when there is multiple forms, information, right? So this is one application. Then we have a part sub URL going to your account, your private account, which I call it here retail. And also often happens there is some kind of sub URL to corporate bank, which is slightly different, right? So as you can see on the pictures, we have one scope, but three different applications. Another term that I would like to present is something called completeness. Right, I would like to present the completeness for the penetration testing. It's a theoretical term, but it's important to understand what kind of penetration testing you are performing, and the management level or the engineering level must understand what implication this brings to the future. I will, of course, show you later. So penetration testing can be done as a complete with application coverage, complete with the vulnerability coverage, or in general, not complete. So let's start when the penetration testing is complete. In my opinion, it's almost impossible to perform, because this means that we test every single place, every single part of the applications against every single possible vulnerability, right? So from technical point of view and the time constraints, it's impossible to make this kind of penetration testing. However, this type of testing have few advantages. One of it is that every new penetration testing, every new report that you have, close the old vulnerabilities, right? If you have in your company vulnerability management for applications, and you have some old vulnerabilities that were found a year ago, a half year ago in the previous pen test. So when you assume that your penetration testing is completed, it closed the old vulnerabilities, right? If they are not in the report, it means they are closed. The other important advantage of this is that if your pen test is complete for the whole scope, as we've seen on the previous slide, it's also completed for a domain, for a retail, and for a corporation, right? When the penetration testing is complete with the application coverage, in this situation, we assume that all parts of the application were enumerated somehow and tested. Of course, different parts of the applications were tested against different vulnerabilities. It's difficult to achieve because not always pen tester has a full knowledge how the application looks like. Not every time we have access to every functionality. Sometimes we do not have access to documentation, so we don't know what should be there else, what else can be found there. So that's why it's not every time possible to achieve. Complete with the vulnerability coverage. So we assume that the application was tested against all the possible vulnerabilities. I've seen many times the reports that we tested against OWASP top 10. We tested against some kind of other checklist, some kind of other methodologies, right? So if you create or you have some kind of methodology or guideline, right? It's easy to say, okay, we tested against everything that was in this guideline. The problem here is that, first of all, it depends on the tester knowledge and experience, right? There are some part of application that testing, I don't know, for example, against SQL injection are pointless, right? There will be no SQL injection in that part because there is no relation to any database, right? Sometimes it's pointless to test against XSS. So everything depends on the knowledge and the experience of the pen tester and how he behaves where he is looking for vulnerabilities. The last part that, in my opinion, is the closest to the reality is just not completed, right? That's how the most of the pen tests are performed, right? So we have some kind of common practice that we test against the most promising vulnerabilities, right? We are trying to test the most promising part of the application. Sometimes the applications are very huge, and we know we don't have enough time, right? So we are testing those parts that can be interesting, right? Where there are some kind of forms, when there is some kind of calls to database, when there's like uploading files functionality, right? So everything depends how the application is built, and of course it depends on the pen tester. The other problem here is that we cannot say, as with the completed, that all vulnerabilities still exist or not, right? If we do not have the knowledge about the all vulnerability, based on this kind of pen test, we cannot say that if we're close or not. Well, if we find it, then we confirm that they still exist. But if we do not find it, we don't know what happened with them. Advantages and disadvantages of this kind of approach. If we move more into the application coverage, right? So it covers wider area of the application and help find the bugs across the whole scope. It is easier for the engineering team, right? If we are reporting this kind of stuff, so they know the exact places when the vulnerabilities are found, so it helps them to fix it. And of course, if we detect the vulnerability in many places, it's also easier to distribute those vulnerabilities to our responsible teams. I will show you on an example exactly how does it works a little later. What are the problems here? Well, some high impact vulnerabilities can be missed, right? We are focusing here on covering the application and on looking something that is interesting. And as I mentioned, it's very difficult to achieve if you don't have any related documentation or any information how the application is built and what should be there. If we are moving more into vulnerability coverage, of course, we have a different type of vulnerabilities covered, and of course, it saves time, right? So in my previous jobs, when I was a pen tester, what we are doing, we are just finding one vulnerability of each type. So, for example, if you find reflected XSS, we were stopped focusing on the reflected XSS and trying to look different type of the bug, right? So trying to find the highest possible range of the vulnerabilities. The problem is that the engineering or the engineers tend to fix only the mentioned vulnerabilities, right? So if you report it, I've seen this many times. If you report it, for example, XSS, and the XSS is caused by input that is not sanitized. They're not trying to make this sanitization correct. They try to fix what I mentioned. And in my life, I had a situation when I showed them there is an XSS, because you can just run script alert, right? So what they did, they were filtering word alert. So next round I said, well, you can do script prompt. Right, so they filtered script. So I said, okay, so you can do image with error. So they filter error, etc., etc. Right. So this happens often, that engineering team is trying to fix the vulnerabilities or even the attack vectors presented in the report and not true problem. The other problem is if the scope, or inside the scope there are a few applications managed by different engineering team, and then there is a problem with distributing who should fix what. Also, the type of the penetration testing influence the completeness, right? It's completely different when we have a black boxing, and completely different when we have a white box pen test. I don't remember if I ever have true white box penetration testing. At this time of testing is very time consuming. Some people may not agree. There is also, as I mentioned many times, hidden parameters, hidden endpoints, hidden functionality, and sometimes it happened that even the functionality is available, right? So, for example, you have a bank, right? You have internet bank, and you have some operations you can perform on different credit cards, right? If you don't have a data for a credit card, the functionality is there, but you cannot use it because you don't have enough data, right? So this is also influence your penetration test. Okay, let's move a little bit into the example that I would like to show you and explain how does it work. The same we already discussed that we have a domain.com retail corp. Okay, so we received the pen tester create a report. Inside the report, there's one vulnerability XSS. This vulnerability, this is XSS, is present against the web page retail/details.html. The XSS inside param1, right? And you receive the report, and the question is, okay, so what is the relation with the corpo application, right? It also has the same web page details that may behave exactly the same, but it's not in the report. So what is the relation, right? Well, that depends how you define the completeness of the report of the penetration testing. If you define it as a complete, then link is safe, right? Everything that is vulnerable should be in the report. If it's not in the report, there is no vulnerability, right? If you assume that your penetration testing is complete in the application coverage, it's undefined, right? We know that the link was tested somehow, but it may not be tested against XSS, right? If we state that the report was the pen test was complete in the vulnerability coverage, it's exactly the same. We tested against the XSS, but in completely different area, right? So we don't know what is the problem with the corpo /details.html. If it's not completed, then completely undefined. We cannot say anything about the second link, right? That's why summarizing this completeness, you may not meet with this kind of problems with the smaller companies or when you are consulting, right? In our companies, when we have sometimes very large applications that are combined with different modules, when the different engineering teams are responsible for those modules, it's very important to understand what are the implications, right? Because okay, let's assume that we have found this XSS in retail, and we send it to the retail team, and we send it to the corpo team, and the corpo team say, okay, there is no problem here, nor corpo link mentioned it. We don't have a problem. Well, you might do have, like, just check it, right? We show it that it's possible. Check in the same place, but they may say, no, in the report, I'm not fixing anything, right? That's why it is important to understand the relations, where we are, how the penetration looks like, right? So I would like to switch the topic right now a little bit to sharing previous reports, right? This is in the context of, like, if we fix the previous vulnerability, or if we don't fix the previous vulnerability. I have only one slide with just the questions, right? But these are the questions that you need to answer, right? We also, in our companies, we needed to answer those questions, and everyone needs to define how does it work, right? So the question is, should the previous report be shared with the current pen tester? Oh, sorry, with the current pen tester is wrong in English, I think. With the pen tester that is currently perform the penetration test, right? The advantages is that he can quickly identify if the previous vulnerabilities will still exist or not, if we have this report. If he doesn't have this report, the question is if the new report can fix the vulnerabilities in the previous report, right? And what if he found different vulnerability in the place that was not mentioned before, right? Or what if he found more that was not previously, or what if he found less than the previously, but not all were fixed, right? These are the questions that it's very important to answer to yourself and decide if you would like to share the previous penetration testing report or not. Multiple security controls. Here is the time and the place when I would like to give my voice to my colleague Piotr. Piotr, you're on.
So thanks. So for the rest of the presentation, I will just quickly go through several other points that are very important in terms of penetration testing in big organizations. So to begin with, we can have security controls that are applied for environments, systems, applications, and so on. So we are discussing the penetration testing, right? But we've got some things that are somehow related, like code review or automatic scanning, right? So probably almost every mature organization has severity implements several of those controls to their systems, right? And the question is how to apply those controls. So we can have both of those controls applied at the same time, right? To some kind of application, for example. Or we can have another approach, which is an one-by-one or sequential approach. So we are applying one control, we are finishing it, then we are going to another control, and so on. So just to quickly discuss the differences between those two approaches, that, of course, there are a lot of differences, but those are the most important ones. So if we are applying all the controls at the same time, we highly reduce the time needed for the application team to apply those controls. So it may occur to be very important if we have a go live soon, for example, right? Because sometimes you are receiving a pen test request and, okay, we've got a go live like in 1 week, right? Or 2 weeks. On the other hand, the security team may duplicate the work because, for example, all the controls may find the same bugs or vulnerabilities, right? And we are duplicating all the work because all of this has to be assessed and so on. In terms of a sequential approach, the process takes much more time because one control is waiting for another, but on the other hand, we can have a better result because, for example, we are performing penetration tests after the automatic scanning and a lot of low and medium severity issues are already gone, right? So we do not have to focus on them, but we can dig into some more complicated stuff like business logic and some more complicated vulnerabilities. And now I would like to quickly switch to one of the most important topics of the penetration testing environment. So typically when we are doing planning a penetration test for some kind of system, we are thinking whether the penetration test should be performed on production or non-production environment. Of course, there are advantages and disadvantages of both approaches. So I would like to highlight them and discuss some real-world scenarios regarding that. So if we are performing a penetration test on the production, then we are performing a penetration test on the most accurate environment that will be eventually used or attacked by our adversary, right? On the other hand, it's the most dangerous environment to test because it is commonly known that we tend to break things during the penetration test. It happens, right? Because we are doing a lot of different stuff with the application, we are fuzzing it and so on. So we can have a very serious impact on integrity or availability of a production application or system, which may introduce a lot of troubles. On the other hand, we've got the non-production environment, which may not be accurate. Sometimes we have an non-production environment and production environment are almost the same. However, it always typically occurs that there are some differences. We can have differences on both code level, right? So we can have a different code base, but the typical changes are present in the configuration, right? So the configuration of the HTTP server, reverse proxy, there are some components which are missing in non-production environment and so on. But of course, typically there is no risk that we will have some serious impact on integrity or availability during this penetration test when we are performing it on the non-production environment. And now I would like to quickly look how, maybe not typically, but quite often, the process of go live happens. So we have, let's say, some kind of application that has a go live soon, and we are performing a penetration test on non-production environment, right? So we are doing a penetration testing. We have found some vulnerabilities. We are providing a report with the results. We have fixes. We are performing a retest. Okay, all issues are closed. We are going live, right? And it occurs that typically the code, the already fixed code, is pushed to a completely different server, right? Which may consist of different components. It may have a different configuration and so on. And I have, I think, a very good real-world example with a web cache poisoning vulnerability. So once we were doing a penetration test on non-production environment, and the host header injection vulnerability was found, right? So the content could be injected in the HTTP response of the application via the host header, and it led to the cross-site scripting vulnerability. And during the penetration test, this issue was evaluated as an informative one because it could not be exploited, right? Because attacker has no control over the host header that is being sent by the victim's browser, right? Of course, as every informative finding, the issue was ignored by the application team. They went live, and it has occurred that in the production environment, there is a web cache implemented, right? So there is a caching mechanism. And it has occurred that this simple host header injection and this content injection that was not exploitable is now completely exploitable on the production environment because there is a cache which remembers the malicious HTTP response and serves it to the client. So from the informative vulnerability, we now have a high or critical severity vulnerability, right? And it was impossible to identify it during the penetration test because there was no web cache in non-production environment. So this is something that we have to remember about, that it is always good to ask the application team, infrastructure team, and so on, are you really sure that the environment is the same? There are no additional components and so on. Just one additional note, it is pretty common to have some functionalities not working or disabled on the non-production environment, right? So we can, for example, have a situation where functionality is not working because we've got some, for example, some credit processing, right? Or second factor, which is not implemented on a non-production environment. So we also have to have it in mind and eventually provide a limitation to the penetration test. And now I would like to go to next very important thing, so to the retest. So everybody thinks that retests are pretty simple, right? But in reality, it is a very challenging process because we deal with a lot of problems there. For example, where is the border of the retest? Should the penetration tester only try to reproduce the proof of concept from the original report, or and if it's fixed, then it's okay, or should penetration tester make an attempt to bypass the implemented protection mechanism, for example, right? Or maybe another very important thing about the retests are the partially fixed evaluation, right? You have probably seen that. So there is no strict definition for the partially fixed, and it often means completely different things. So it's hard to track those vulnerabilities which are partially fixed after the retest. And of course, the scheduling has a very big impact on retesting, because if we have a scheduled retest, so the penetration tester has no other activities, only the retest, he can have more time for example, those bypasses of protection mechanisms, right? So the vulnerability seems fixed, but I don't like it. I will try to see if I can disrupt it, right? So if I can bypass the protections and so on. In reality, we are, in majority of cases, we are performing an ad hoc retest where we are performing other parallel tasks, right? Another penetration test, right? So we are performing penetration tests. Somebody calls, okay, we've got an urgent retest. We've got 4 hours to retest 10 vulnerabilities, right? So we have to bear in mind that it may lead to the situation when we close the vulnerability and say that it is fixed, but it will occur that if the penetration tester had 1 or 2 hours more, it may occur that this particular protection mechanism could be bypassed and the vulnerability still exists. And one sentence regarding the part, the distinction between vulnerability and bug that Marek was saying in the beginning of the presentation. The penetration testing doesn't find bugs, but it finds vulnerabilities. And during the retest, we typically cannot prove that the book was also fixed, right? We can only typically prove that the vulnerability was fixed. Just one sentence about the change management. So it is probably a topic for a different presentation because it's really big. However, the biggest problem is that sometimes the fixes are applied only to the non-production environment or the environment where you are performing a penetration test. But in reality, it is not applied to production, right? Because application team just wanted to quickly close the issue, right? So we have to bear in mind that when we do a retest also on the non-production environment, there is a slight chance that the fix is not implemented in the most important environment. And then probably the basis of the penetration testing, so the scope, right? So it's really a huge problem in the large organizations when we've got a big ecosystem, we've got a lot of different systems which are connected to each other. And pretty often one system redirects you to another and so on and so on. So we also have to keep it in mind that such limitations, such problems with scope definition may occur, and it is very easy to touch other systems during the penetration test, and we may not even be aware of that. And for example, we've got foreign vulnerabilities, so we are performing a penetration test of one application, and we are exploiting like SQL injection. But in reality, it occurs that we are exploiting SQL injection in different applications because it has occurred that one API is forwarding requests to another API, right? So it has happened once to me. So I was exploiting SQL injection in a completely different company because the scope did not include the fact that these particular endpoints forward requests to another API, right? And of course, we've got some limitations, like we cannot, for example, especially if we are working on non-production environment, we can have some functionalities disabled. Or for example, it is very common if you've got a second factor, so the second factor is not fully implemented in the non-production environment. And it occurs that every provided value is accepted, so we are not able to validate whether the second factor is properly implemented in the production, for example. One quick note about the findings granularity. So we can, if we have multiple connected findings, like, for example, 5 reflected cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, we can aggregate it into one vulnerability, like multiple cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and so on, or we can split them. So there are some drawbacks and advantages of that, but we have to also keep in mind that if we are connecting vulnerabilities into a one big, like in here, for example, we've got SSL issues, so we ciphers use TLS11, TLS10, and so on, and we aggregate them into a one finding, then there will be problems with tracking and retesting, right? Because for example, if you have 5 issues, then we are retesting 5 issues, right? 4 are closed and 1 is still open, right? But if we have a one finding in the report, then it will probably end up as partially fixed, right? Because not all the vulnerabilities and problems were fixed. So maybe I will I will skip the time of penetration testing because we are almost on time and we need the time for questions. So just to finish, I will quickly say 2 words about internal methodologies. So large organizations like to have control over everything. I mean everything. And it is pretty common to have some internal policies and methodologies regarding the penetration testing, right? So it may occur that organization has a set of to-do checklists the penetration tester has to do during the pen test, right? And those checklists are good in general because sometimes penetration tester can forget about something and then he looks at it and says, oh, okay, I forget about that and it's in the checklist, right? So I will do that right now. However, there are some traps. Right, so typically those methodologies are time-consuming. Sometimes they may kill pen testers' creativity if the checklist and methodology is too big, too wide. Even if these policies, methodologies are well prepared, they may appear to be impractical in some untypical cases, right? And as one example, we can assume that we have an application which is quite complex. It has a high number of endpoints. We've got uncommon technology and so on. And we've got 10 days scoped for the penetration test, right? And also we've got an internal methodology which has to be fulfilled. And it appears that we've got several approaches here. So maybe we'll start with a second approach. So the second approach says that methodology gets completely fulfilled. So, for example, penetration tester does everything for all of the endpoints, right? So the methodology says that do this, and this for this particular, for all of the endpoints, right? So the penetration has fulfilled methodology and is compliant with a methodology and policies, right? But penetration tester, for example, is not happy because he had to skip some parts of the application, which seems to be in particular suspicious and probably vulnerable, but he had no time to verify that, right? In the first approach, the pen tester can base his work on his experience and knowledge, right? So he knows that he will not be able to cover the whole application during a single penetration test. So he tries to focus on the most important issues and looks for them in the places that look suspicious to him, right? So it's pretty often reasonable, but it's incompliant, right? So we are not compliant with our internal policies. And the third approach is the mixture of first and the second. However, typically we would need twice more time to combine both of those approaches, right? So we've got, of course, we could talk about it a lot and we could find far more issues and problems with the penetration testing in large organizations. However, we would like to highlight that we have to remember that the success of the penetration testing is not only dependent on one person, so the penetration tester. It's important how application team cooperates with the penetration tester, right? So if they are helpful, they want to have their application secure, it goes well, right? If not, we may have problems, right? And the penetration test quality may be lowered. And the last sentence from the conclusion, penetration testing is based on the creativity, right? So it's hard to close penetration tests within some boundaries where large organizations tend to do that, right? So we have to remember that penetration testers like freedom and creativity, and they work better in such situations. So I think that will be all.
We have one question, just one. We can take one. Thank you both for the presentation. That's a lot of food for thought. And thank you for bringing so much nuance and for anchoring all of the complexity that penetration testing evolves into reality, especially since you deal with systems that are so critical to the financial well-being of not just the company, but its many customers as well. So a single question, the one that I picked for you from attendees is how large of a challenge is to centralize findings from multiple types of automated scans and from manual pen tests so that everyone on the team has maximum visibility and clarity. And how time consuming is that? And if you have any tricks or solutions to help you deal with this and then create that clarity.
So it's not so easy, right? And of course, everything depends on the organization, how large it is, right? So as I mentioned, right now we have only penetration testing team is 30 people, right? So we have probably the same huge team that is responsible for kind of vulnerability scanning and code scanning. Right, there are also a teams responsible for the vulnerabilities that are published in internet, right? So when you have I don't know, infrastructure or systems, when you have like CVEs for Windows, for Red Hat, whatever, and it's coming live, and there is a patch, there is another team that's handling that. So it's a quite challenging to bring everyone in one place. It's not very easy. So we are still evolving. We are still working on that in our company. I cannot tell you how, because it's not about our company, but it's very quite challenging, right? You can see. So try ask your colleagues who want to go for a lunch and ask what they want. And you have 10 people, 12 different answers, and you need to coordinate, right? And right now in this organization, we have 3 or 4 different teams that they generate hundreds, well, maybe hundreds, not, but dozens of reports per month, right? So this is kind of challenging, and of course, different teams has different approaches, different even different report is a problem, right? Like different templates. Different things are coming from vulnerability scanning. Different things are coming from us, right? We provide different evidencing. The vulnerability scanning provide different evidencing. The code scanning provide completely different evidencing, and they are performing in different ways. So it's unfortunately it's not easy to manage, and there is no one golden recipe that I can provide you to have it built correctly in 1 month, right? It's a process.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I was just about to highlight that, the value of process and the fact that standardization is difficult to achieve when you have so many components working together, and it's basically the game of moving parts that's constantly changing. So specialization coupled with hopefully good communication can help alleviate some of those problems.
Exactly.
Excellent.
And well, I can come to the DefCamp in 5 years and answer to that question.
Fingers crossed. I hope you find a solution before then.
of course, right.
Thank you both for being here and for sharing your experience and being so generous with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a good day, and have a good conference.